Okay, on the other side you can see the same dual brake chamber. You want to look at the hose lines, make sure they're intact. And like I said, once again, the shiny disc with no oil or no contaminations. Right, there's something else I want to show you on the differential here. Come around this way, John. On the top of the differential, there's a vent right here. Can you see that, John? Mm-hmm. Okay, this is a vent that vents that internal container of 90 weight gear oil to the atmosphere. We recommend that you not drive through any water any deeper than the center line of the axle, which means the center line of the wheel. If you go above that point, the water can wash over this vent and actually enter into the chamber of the differential and contaminate the oil. If you go through deep water, that's fine, you're on an emergency and you need to, but if it's above the center line of the wheel, that must be reported immediately to your supervisor and the fire garage so that we can change the oil in this and the contaminated water can be removed. All right, on this side, we take a look at the tire condition again, and then we're going to move to the back of the truck. One of the last components you're going to see is the fuel cell or fuel tank. On the fuel tank will be a data plate. This tank is rated at 65 gallons. This tank is tested to a certain pressure and should contain this diesel fuel for the life of the truck. You're looking for any signs of damage. You can see this is a low point on the truck. Make sure that nothing has hit the tank on the front, on the leading edge, or the back, and it should be nice and dry. This tube right here is your water tank overfill tube. When you're filling your tank and it gets to the top, it will actually flow over and dump onto the ground through this tube. On the back of the truck, you want to take a look at the continuation of the frame rail. It comes down and supports the rear tailboard. There should be no damage in this area, and all the bolts and attaching hardware should be in place. All right. Okay, the last thing I want to cover, well, maybe not the last thing, but for right now, let's take a look at this tire condition. We already discovered a really deep gouge in the tire, but as part of your daily, weekly, and monthly inspection, we want to look at the entire condition of the inner sidewall and the outer sidewall. Now, of course, a dually tire, you can't see this very well, but you should still take a look and make sure that they're not touching. If the truck's sitting on the ground and the tires are touching here, that indicates that one or both of them have low pressure. Right? So we look at the entire sidewall of the tire, inside and out, and we want to inspect, we want to make sure it doesn't have any cuts, bubbles, or delamination. Also, we want to look at the depth of the tread. Okay, minimum tread depth on a Miami fire truck or fire apparatus, rescues included, is 4/32 of an inch, or 1/8 of an inch. 1/8 of an inch is a very, very small amount of 1 inch. If it gets to that point, then it cannot be used in emergency services. But it should never really get to that point. You should never get to the minimum tread wear depth. If it starts looking bad, then you want to have the shop take a look at the tire and inspect it, and they will project how much longer it'll be on the road until the next scheduled service, and they will more likely than not change the tire and put a new tire on the truck. So 4/32 of an inch, okay, on all of the different tread lines. Okay. If you look on the edge of the tire, there's a tread wear indicator. Small, on this type of tire, it's a small triangle right here. This indicates a high spot within the tread. When the tread wears down to 4/32 of an inch, it will actually indicate with a straight line, a straight solid line across the tire. Okay, so that is an obvious sign of minimal wear, but like I said, it should never get to that point. Remember, 4/32 of an inch is a limit. That's 1/8 of an inch, and I guarantee you that you wouldn't let that kind of tire be on your personal car. You certainly don't want it on a fire truck. Any question about tires should be referred to your company officer and the fire garage immediately. Camera over here.
Ready.
Okay, let's see. Where's it going? Oh, it's hard to see here. You know what? I think maybe we can find a better. But the other one's up on top and you can't really see it.
Alright, I'm ready.
Okay. If you look right in this area, you'll see the actual discharge relief valve that we use to prevent pressure surges when we're pumping the apparatus and we're pumping hand lines. You can see the lines going to it. These are the control lines. And on one side is the discharge pressure, and on the other side is the intake side. So when the relief valve opens, it dumps the pressure from the discharge side back to the intake side, thereby relieving that critical spike in pressure, and it doesn't allow it to be transmitted into the fire lines that you're pumping. Okay, in this area we've looked at the differential. Now just above the differential, on a typical fire truck, you're going to see the rear air brake chambers. There's one here and one on the other side. Okay, these contain the air pressure at least 125 psi for operating the air brakes. A minimum of 100 psi is required, and during your inspection you should be looking at the hose lines and make sure that there's no obvious signs of damage or deformity to these tanks. Okay, we looked at a typical fire truck. Now we're going to look at a typical rescue truck. We're going to look at the steering components and the front suspension components because they're easily exposed when you tilt the cab. In this area right here, you can see the steering column rod that comes down, very similar to the fire truck, from the steering wheel. Comes down through a U-joint and into the power steering box. In this area, this is where the hydraulic power steering fluid assists you in turning this rod. It assists transmitting that circular input into a linear motion through the pitman arm. This is the pitman arm. Once again, you'll see a castellated nut and a cotter pin on this joint. This is another critical joint for the steering components. This must be in place. You can see here is also a drag link that goes from the pitman arm back to the upper steering arm. Very similar to the fire truck, and you can see another cotter pin here and a castellated nut. Okay, the linear force drives the wheel either left or right. On this truck happens to have hydraulic disc brakes, very similar to a car. So we use hydraulic fluid under pressure to squeeze the discs on the disc brakes. But back to the steering components. Down here you can see the same tie rod and tie rod ends are out here. Here, another castellated nut, and there's the tie rod end and the tie rod that goes across. Okay, here's also the left front shock absorber that should be inspected, as well as the frame rail of the truck.